Hi, Ruchi. How are you?
Hi, Rob. Good. How about you?
I am doing great. It is so good to see you.
You too. You too. Happy New Year. I know it is March, but we have not seen each other in a few months.
That's
Uh,
right. That's right. I think the rule is you can still say it up until the end of the first quarter. So
Perfect.
we probably have another couple weeks here.
All right.
All right. So it's been a while.
It has
And I
been.
know we talked the other day about a topic for the Rob and Ruchi show.
Hmm.
And we talked about the role of DEI in times of economic resilience and why do organizations need to be leaning more into these areas as we face some of the headwinds ahead in the economy. So
Yeah.
it's a pretty interesting topic and one I think lends itself to some great conversation. So what do you think? Where's
Yeah.
the start?
Well, look, I think the first thing for me to caveat is that this is a topic quite close to my heart. My work is centered around DEI. I help run programs around underrepresented leaders and capability building and upskilling for them specifically. But a lot of the research that's been coming out lately, almost like a retrospective of where we've been since 2020, has pointed to a few troubling trends. One, that organizations are not able to make good on the promises that were made in 2020. The financial promises, the advancement promises, things like that. There's a lot of levers, a lot of reasons why, right? There might be not enough resources, recruiting, all kinds of reasons why, but I don't think we're making as much headway in terms of those goals set in 2020 as would be appreciated. I think too is we're seeing in these rounds of layoffs that quite frankly have been quite unprecedented, right? The
Yeah.
level and the vigor of layoffs across all industries. DEI functions being kind of the first on the chopping block or being the casualty. So
Wow.
chief diversity officers, diversity functions, and of those who are left, even more troublingly, the CDOs that aren't falling to these attrition numbers, they are white, which in itself is maybe not an issue. But if you think about parity and
Mhm.
the folks who were hired again in 2020, sometimes darkly called, the class of 2020,
Right.
these folks who are kind of brought in, it's quite disheartening. And why it matters, I think, is because of two things. The great attrition is still happening, right? The great resignation, the great attrition,
Yep.
alongside all of these layoffs, people are still leaving.
Yep.
They're not
Right.
staying out of fear. And two of the biggest reasons we've seen in research, right, from McKinsey and other places, that employees cite leaving their previous employer. One is lack of career development and advancement. More than 50% of people say that.
Yep.
And two is lack of inclusion. And this is specifically marketed for underrepresented populations like Asians, Black leaders, and Hispanic and Latino leaders.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's a very unfortunate but yet important topic here. And one of the perspectives I wanted to share and ask you about is, at the end of the day, having good diversity, equity, and inclusion, and all three things being balanced and important, it is good for business. And so, as I was thinking about the topic, and I'm thinking about what do you do when you're faced with these headwinds, and you just told a story, and we know it's happening, the story of the cuts and the story of the continued great resignation, the leaders who are left, the leaders who are trying to set and execute strategy, they should know that it is good for business. What are you saying?
Yeah.
What's the thought?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a few things. I think absent of a DEI function, how are you proving to your people who are still there that it matters?
Hmm.
What are the signals that you're sending? What are the support structures you're creating? And these, by the way, don't have to be high cost measures, right?
Right,
Thinking about something as simple as, do you have an ERG set up in your
right.
organization? Are you offering opportunities for people with underrepresented racial or ethnic identities to convene together? Are you creating opportunities for sponsorship and mentorship in your organization?
Yeah.
All of these things are often left to HR, talent, or DEI functions that, again, now are being cut. So who is taking the onus on when those people are not there anymore?
I got to tell you something. Gosh, I'm listening to you, and it reminds me yesterday, I pitched a project with a Fortune 500 company. The project being the development of a new executive leadership program. And the clients were very, very explicit, saying they wanted something different, something unique. And one of the major themes that they put into the requirements is that there must be a real and true DEI component to the executive leadership, and not just the traditional stuff, something new and unique and different. And when we were talking about it and I was probing about what they're looking for, they said, listen, we can no longer just rely on the chief diversity officer to put a program into place. That's almost insulting. We need to embed in our future leaders that they have the responsibility, the ownership of making sure that they are being inclusive, they are getting the right diversity of thought, because at the end of the day, again, it is right for the business.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think the responsibility becomes woven in and part of the incentivization for leaders in the organization. I think the role of a chief diversity officer to me is quite interesting. I think a lot of organizations misunderstand and misuse them, quite
Yeah,
like how chief learning officers have been misused in the past, right?
right, right,
You're not just there to deploy a program in a vacuum. I think where we've seen it be successful is they become true strategic partners, just the way that you're saying, Rob, and they create the policies and the performance evaluation metrics and the systems at
right,
these organizations where leaders then take responsibility for making
right,
their teams reflect what it should look like. And
right.
I think, again, as organizations think about how do we lean further into DEI rather than away from it, even if we do have to make these cuts, I think they have to think about it from that lens of systematically and systemically,
Right.
what are we doing to signal that we care about this stuff?
And what's the why?
Yeah.
Why
Mhm.
should I care about this?
Yeah.
And as I started to think about our dialogue for today, I started to think about things that I've seen, but then I started to just talk to some clients this week about their perspective in anticipation of the conversation. And a couple things I'll share with you in my research. And obviously this isn't statistically valid. It was about 3 or 4 clients that I really respect. And a couple things that they shared with me. Um, Diversity of thought provides more opportunities for us to innovate as a business. When things get tough, we have to realize that the old approaches won't work. At the end of the day, when things are in a recession and we have to eliminate waste, having diversity of thought and inclusion is more efficient. And then the last one that I got was it's building brand. It's
Mhm.
building brand of you as a leader, if you really truly are executing on this, but it's also building the brand of your company, which then systemically goes into retention, recruitment, and then just better positioning in the market.
Yeah, I think all three of those are absolutely correct. I think some of the things that are supplemental to that, right? Like when you say diversity of thought, it improves outcomes. I mean, the research proves that, right? Like
Yeah,
even having the anecdotal is not
right.
like is not bad, but the
Right.
research proves it, right? Diversity of thought. I also say that the research proves like the kind of profit and performance advantage that comes from diverse
Mhm.
organizations. There was a report a few years ago called Diversity Matters that was released that kind of just showed that there is a marked performance advantage
Yeah,
for organizations just from a profit perspective that have more ethnically, racially diverse, and gender diverse workforces. And in
yeah,
fact, the organizations that rank lower on that index actually like perform worse than the average. It's not that they just stay the same. They actually perform worse than the
yeah,
industry average.
yeah,
And so there is like an actual real imperative not to only have a diverse workforce, but to keep and retain and advance that workforce because you need those voices at every level of leadership. And I think that's the step that a lot of organizations aren't quite there yet, right? They might say we're recruiting diverse talent, we have
yeah,
diversity of thought, but we're not keeping them because guess what? People leave if they do not feel like they're being advanced or they don't feel included, belonging. And so organizations are saying, how do we do that?
Yeah.
And my answer, I mean, very simply is like, how do you do it for any other person? How do you create belonging? How do you think about advancement for people who are not underrepresented or marginalized?
Yeah.
You give them visibility, you give them opportunities for high profile projects, you invest in their capability development, things like that.
Yep. No, absolutely. I'll share with you another little story, something we worked on this week. One of our clients asked us to design a workshop, and they wanted that workshop to be around learning lessons of diversity, equity, inclusion. But here's the thing though, Ruch, they said, we can't call it a DEI workshop.
Mm.
What we're going to do is we're going to call it a collaboration workshop. However, our objectives are to actually see if people learn that being more inclusive,
Mhm.
listening to the different voices will actually work, and is it provable? So we took one of our core business simulations. That was the case study. But we said to them, you're on a mission. You have 5 years to run your simulated company. You have 5 people on your team. You need to figure out a way to be the most inclusive, to
Mm.
create a situation by which you're listening to everybody's voices and you are moving together in the best way possible.
Mm.
So design that process around the simulation. At the end of the exercise with the simulation, they then did a deep dive debriefing on their inclusiveness. And they actually looked at the patterns of how they made decisions and took that as learning. Guess
I love
what?
that.
The team that did the best in the business, created the most shareholder value, also scored out the best in terms of their DEI. So that was something that made me feel really good this week.
Yeah, it's a great correlation. And I think like looking at an inclusion index is actually quite smart. And a lot of
Yeah.
organizations could benefit from really like specifically looking beyond just diversity, which is important,
Yeah.
and even looking at, beyond inclusion in some ways. What are we doing to make sure that there's true equity of thought as well, right? And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that we're seeing is, especially with inclusion, a lot of folks just say like the biggest plus of inclusion is a bigger sense of belonging. And I don't mean to poo-poo that. I actually think
Yeah.
belonging is huge, and we've
Sure.
seen the impact. But what we've seen is that learning alongside other people who have a shared identity,
Mm,
racial, ethnic, gender, having an opportunity to be like truly frank and open, or even an opportunity to just talk about your identity in a way that
right.
is truly psychologically safe,
Yeah. Yeah.
where there's no risk of retribution, right?
Right.
Is transformational in ways that you might not be able to have picked up before. For example, people have more confidence. They
Hmm.
are raising
Yeah.
their hand for opportunities that they did not
Mm,
before. People are more apt to be more visible. Organizations find high potential talent that they hadn't before. They feel a sense of psychological safety and renewal, which we know is huge
hmm. Yeah.
for retention. So I think there's all these unsaid benefits to these concepts that organizations are used to kind of saying, yeah, it's important, but I'm not going to intentionally cultivate. That when
Right.
you do intentionally cultivate, like you just said, and actually measure,
Hmm.
the output is incredible.
Yep. And I agree 100%. Giving people the opportunity to work in environments with shared identities is really important for the things you said. It's the confidence, it's the retention, and so forth. However, as I'm listening to you say that, I also think it's important for leaders to create environments where there's a not shared identity, where it's really truly different, whether it's functional, whether
Yeah.
it's gender-based,
Hmm.
sexual identity-based,
Hmm.
that you develop an appreciation and an empathy really for the other identities and leverage it for optimization.
Absolutely. I think divergent viewpoints in one room together is really important. I read a book recently about like bridgers, bonders, and
Yes, somebody else mentioned that book, and I
yeah, I
forget to
forget I
find
forget
out.
the last one, but it was a really interesting concept that you have people who are breakers, they seek to divide. You have
Yeah,
people who are bridgers, well, you have people who are bonders who seek to kind of be in the safe space of like people who are like them.
yeah,
And you have people who are bridgers who really seek to bring two sides together. And I love the concept. My caution from a DEI standpoint, and this is where organizations are well-meaning but get it
yeah.
wrong, right? Is that when you have a majority group and you're putting a minority of people in that majority group have a divergent viewpoint, it's not always going to do what you think it's going to do. It's not always going to have them like actually share and open windows and mirrors. Right. And so I think as organizations think about intentional cohort construction or the rooms that they're creating, how do you create truly, for lack of a better word, like mixed rooms, right? I think the functional area thing is actually quite interesting.
Yeah.
Like, let's create cross-functional collaboration and bring
Yeah.
people of all these different identities together.
Totally agree. Ruchi,
Yeah.
as always, the time flies by.
Always.
What an insightful conversation. I always learn, and it always gives me great ideas. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
It is good to see you. And until the next time.
Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.